Hi, I'm Josh Isbell. Over a decade ago, I began researching how people change and become successful because I was at the lowest point in my life and stuck in a mental and physical prison. Finally, in 2015, I discovered self development through Napoleon Hill's book, Think and Grow Rich, and I devoured its content. I learned about neuroplasticity and how to reprogram my mind. The mind is like a muscle, and content geared towards self development acts as the weights we use to strengthen it. The more we consume the type of content and use it to think differently, the more new emotions we create, which in turn create new neural pathways in the brain when applied with intent. As they say, neurons that fire together wire together. For 5 years and counting, I have been using content like the videos I am making for you. I listen to them with focused intention, sometimes even using them as background music, or even to fall asleep to at night, as this is when our brains are in theta and more open to suggestion for what we want to program into our minds. I hope you find this content as useful as I have, and I am thrilled that you have decided to join me on your journey to a better life. Get ready for the Law of Attraction compilation with Joe Dispenza.
First of all, every time we have a thought, we make a chemical. And if you have an unlimited thought, you will feel unlimited. And if you have a self-depreciating thought, you'll feel unworthy. And your brain instantaneously fires circuits that signal another part of the brain to release peptides or chemical messengers that signal hormonal centers. And when we get that arousal from the thought that we think, those thoughts sometimes weaken, the response weakens the physical body. So turns out that the emotions that are created from the thoughts are the signaling mechanisms of the body. Thoughts are the language of the brain, and feelings are the language of the body. And how we think and how we feel creates our state of being. So it turns out that the thoughts based in the stress hormones, based in survival, those are the thoughts that begin to push the genetic buttons that create disease. In other words, a person wakes up in the morning, and the brain is a record of the past. The first thing they do when they wake up in the morning is they start thinking about their problems. And those problems are memories that are etched in the brain that are connected to certain people, certain objects, certain things at certain times and places. So if you believe that your thoughts have something to do with your destiny, the moment you think about your problems, you're thinking in the past, right? Mm-hmm. Now, every one of those problems has an emotion associated with them because we've experienced them. So the moment you remember your problems, now you feel unhappy. Now you feel anxious. Now you feel fear. So the moment we feel those emotions, it takes a thought and a feeling, a memory or an image and an emotion, a stimulus and a response, and we start conditioning the body emotionally into the past. Now, the body is so objective that it doesn't know the difference between the real-life experience that's creating that emotion and the emotion that person's fabricating by thought alone. The body's believing it's in that environmental condition. So if the environment signals the gene, and that's the truth, and the end product of an experience in the environment is an emotion, we're signaling the same genes, and genes make proteins. And if you keep signaling the same genes, you start down-regulating the gene to make cheaper proteins, and the body begins to break down. Now, that's an unconscious process. So what goes along with that is the moment the person feels that emotion of unhappiness or whatever it is, the brain checks in with the body and says, yeah, you're feeling pretty miserable, you're suffering. And we tend to generate more thoughts equal to the feeling that we have. And so then we get caught in this loop of thinking and feeling. So if we can't think greater than how we feel, or feelings have become the means of thinking, then we're thinking in the past, right? And so we call that the familiar past. And then a person gets going in the day and they start thinking, oh, I got to see this person. I got to go to that meeting. I hate doing this. And now they get in their routine. And a habit is a redundant set of automatic, unconscious thoughts, behaviors, and emotions that's acquired through repetition. A habit is when you've done something so many times that the body now knows how to do it better than the mind. So now the person running through the same routine every single day is on autopilot, and their body's now dragging them into a predictable future based on what they did in the past, and they've lost their free will to a set of programs, right? So now you have the familiar past and you have the predictable future. Those are knowns. So the only place then, reasonably, where the unknown exists is the sweet spot of the generous present moment. That is when the body and mind are free from those conditions. So along with those emotions that influence the same thoughts, people start becoming more judgmental. They start becoming more impatient. They start becoming more entitled. They start getting more afraid, more anxious, more depressed. And now the body is literally being depleted of energy because it's believing that it's living in an emergency situation. And in emergency, you tap all of the body's resources for some threat, whether it's real or imagined. And so then when you're releasing all of these chemicals, we are literally drawing the body's life force and turning it into chemistry. And so for the short term, that's cool. But the arousal that's created from those stress hormones is a rush of energy. And so then people use the problems and the conditions in their life to reaffirm their conditioning or their addiction to that emotion. And in a sense, they become addicted to the life they don't even like. And this is why change is so hard. So then when a person makes up their mind to change and they say, okay, I'm not going to say I can't, I'm not going to judge another person, I'm not going to blame, I'm not going to complain, I'm not going to make excuses, I'm not going to be a victim, I'm not going to talk trash about anybody, I'm just going to stop. Well, that works out really well for the first couple hours. Then the body's saying you're out of schedule. You normally at 8 in the morning, you're getting traffic and you're angry. Then at 11 o'clock, you check your emails and you're really judgmental and frustrated. And the body's saying, oh, well, you've been doing this for the last 20 years. You're just going to stop today. So no, the body, which has been conditioned emotionally to be the mind, wants to return back to its familiar territory, to the known. So the body starts influencing the mind. And it says, come on, this is a good time to judge. Come on, this is a good time to suffer. It's your ex's fault. It's the government's fault. It's it's the weather, the news, whatever it is. And if we accept, believe, and surrender to that thought without analyzing it, it slips by and it begins to program the autonomic nervous system to make those pharmacy of chemicals. And so that's when the person makes the same choice, does the same thing, creates the same experience just for that familiar feeling. Okay, I'll complain just so I can feel suffering. Then they'd rather be unhappy than step into the unknown, to step into possibility. And the hardest part about that process, first of all, is not making the same choices you did the day before. And here's the payoff. You got to stay conscious and not go unconscious. And it turns out that 95% of the time we're unconscious. So if you're going to stay conscious, then there's an element that also requires a certain amount of awareness or energy. And you got to step outside of that unconscious state. So the thoughts that they're thinking are slipping by their awareness unnoticed because they're hardwired in their brain, because they've been saying, I can't, it's too hard, my life will never change, it's someone else's fault. Those thoughts have consequences in the body. So then if a person then becomes conscious of those unconscious thoughts, becomes aware of how they speak and how they act, and they notice how they're feeling, they're no longer the program. They're the consciousness outside the program, and that's the first step to change. So when you're distracted by your environment and you got your cell phone and you're tweeting and you're Instagramming and Facebooking and whatever people do, you're distracted by that feeling. But I now know that if you take a person and you say, okay, close your eyes, sit in the silence of any external stimulation, remove the environment, sit your body down like an animal. Body is the animal. Tell it to stay. I'm going to feed you. You can check your cell phone, you can shower, you can have your coffee, but when I say, and so then here comes the challenge, right? So, and then if you say then you're not going to live in the familiar past or predictable future, you're not going to think about how long you've been meditating, what you got to do. You labor for that present moment. People think when they do this that they're doing something wrong because there's such discomfort that comes with it. But they're in the unknown. They're actually doing it right. People say, I think I'm meditating wrong. I always say, oh, no, you're doing it right. Because when you notice that your body wants to get up and check your cell phone or have a cup of coffee, and you become aware that it's on autopilot and wants to do that, and you say, come on over here, and you return it back to the present moment, you're executing a will now that's greater than the program. And if the person wants to just get angry while they're sitting there, there's an arousal, and they notice the body is amping up and revving up, and they settle it back down. Now they're telling the body it's no longer the mind, that they're the mind. Now, we've researched this, and it's tedious in the beginning at first because David is fighting Goliath. But if you keep practicing it, just like training an animal, sooner or later the body acquiesces. Sooner or later the body is trained to a new mind. And when that happens, there's a liberation of energy. The body goes from particle to wave, from matter to energy. And there goes that emotion, literally liberated from the body as energy. So the person who has the strong emotion to some circumstance in their life, and they're working on lowering the volume of that emotion, the more they lower the volume of that emotion, the more they're going to take their attention off that person and problem, and they're going to take their power back. There's going to be a break in their attention from that circumstance. And now they build their own field. And now there's energy to heal. Now there's energy to create a new life. Now there's energy for the mystical moment because they've overcome their old personality self. So I think, it's not like thinking positively. That's not the message.
Yeah.
It's overcoming until we become somebody else. And when that occurs and the person starts thinking differently and they start acting differently and they start feeling differently, they're a new personality. And they start seeing those synchronicities and serendipities. Now, crossing that river of change, the creative process now gets exciting because what thoughts do you want to fire and wire in your brain? What kind of attention and intention do you want to place so that that becomes the loudest voice in your head? And if you keep practicing it, the hardware becomes a software program, and it'll say, Jay, you can do anything. Jay, you live in no time and accomplish everything. Jay, you're unlimited. You just got to hang with it. On the other side of this is greatness. Whatever you want to program in there, you get to program in there. If you sat down and say, how am I going to be with my wife, my husband, my partner? How am I going to be with my kids? How am I going to be at work with my coworkers? How am I going to be in traffic? And you close your eyes and you begin to rehearse in your mind. If you're truly present, the brain does not know the difference between the real life experience and what you're imagining. So now the brain goes from a record of the past to a map to the future. Now you're installing the hardware. Keep practicing it. It becomes automatic. It becomes easier. Now it's a software program. You may just start behaving differently. And then if you said, well, listen, I'm not going to wait for my healing to feel gratitude. I'm not going to wait for my new relationship to feel love. I'm going to actually teach my body emotionally what that future feels like before it happens. Now, this is a big turnaround for a lot of people because we're so reliant on the outer world to change our inner world, right?
And waiting and postponing.
And waiting is not creating. I mean, period. And when people they could have the greatest intentions in the world, but if they don't combine that with an elevated emotion, there's no signal because the elevated emotion is the carrier. It's the energy that carries the thought. So then when we're in separation, in lack, waiting for our wealth to feel abundance, we're basically living our whole life in pain, right? So then if you reason this and a person can get up from their meditation and they literally feel differently and they're feeling the emotions of their future before it happens, this is turning the whole process around. They can't be looking for it. Why would they be looking for it if they felt like it already happened? Now there's no separation. Now this is when those serendipities and coincidences and opportunities begin to show up in people's lives. So it's work, but then when they start seeing the experience in their life, all of a sudden they start believing they're more of the creator of their life and less of the victim of their life. When you're at a greater level of awareness, everything seems to be more connected. That's what the quantum is. So you're playing at that level. The synchronicities, the serendipities, the coincidences are actually informing you that you actually are creating your life. And that's the difference between being the victim of your life and being the creator of your life. Because when the environment is controlling the way we feel and the way we think, some person, some circumstance, some condition, what does that really mean? That means that person or circumstance is actually causing me to think and feel a certain way. And I don't think I have any control of it, then I must be victim to that circumstance, right? And that's a program, right?
Yeah.
So I realized in my own journey also that if I don't change my response to things in my life, I'll never change. So it's not that you respond. The question really is how long, right? So when you become aware that your environment is controlling how you think and feel, and your response changes, watch out, because now you no longer belong to the past. You actually belong to the future. So get a coherent heart. We know how to do that really well. Get a coherent brain. We can do that really well. Have people take all of their attention off the material world, off of everything known, go from a convergent focus to a divergent focus. We got the data to prove that if you keep putting your attention on nothing, on space, somehow the brain gets highly organized. So now, brain coherence, heart coherence, you synchronize your energy to whatever it is you want. And you got to sustain that state. You can't. We've had people that have healed themselves from Parkinson's disease, from cancers, from ALS, literally remission of the condition, and then have bad news. And in 1 hour driving to the hospital, all of their symptoms came back after being completely healed for 2 years. That's how strong those emotions are, right? So in your circumstance, right, I want people to have those moments where they have to literally choose, because I think when it's the hardest, it matters the most. That's what I think. So all those things where you're agitated with a person having their moment, that could be you having your moment, right? And you would want someone to just like that person doesn't want to do that. They're just having their thing, right? So,
but it was interrupting my thing.
Of course. By
the way, you can use those pillows on your back if you want to have a little
fine.
lumbar.
But it's so essential, because when you realize actually that you have control over your thoughts, that means now that actually you have control over your brain. And most people, the brain has control over them when it's hardwired. You got to disentangle from those programs, and you need a little time. It takes energy, and it takes awareness, right? So the synchronicities that are the side effect of a change in energy, because I've been at this for a long time, and I can tell you that nobody changes until they change their energy. And when you change your energy, you change your life. It's just the way it goes. But having a very coherent brain and a coherent heart somehow puts that Wi-Fi signal out. And now those side effects where everything starts to make sense, then you don't want to change the past. You're not saying, oh, I'm this way because of you're saying, wow, all of that's leading to this. I this all makes sense. I had to go this way.
Yeah.
I've had so many people that had brutal pasts. I mean, horrible, horrible circumstances and abuse. The moment they had their moment and they finally broke through, they looked at their entire past and they realized they didn't want to change one thing in their past, because it brought them to this elegant moment of freedom. And she looked back at her betrayers. He looked back at his betrayers, and they had nothing but understanding and compassion for them. They didn't belong to the past anymore. They belonged to the future. They got out. So the side effect of that now is the synchronicities causing you to say, whatever I'm doing in here, whatever this is that I'm doing that's producing that out there, I'm not so interested in reacting or responding and defaulting back to the old self, because then I'd be the same energy, the same feelings, the same thoughts. My life would be the same. So now the big game is, okay, we're doing the meditations, but for what? To get so good at doing it with your eyes closed that you can do it with your eyes open.
Yeah, I've been doing that now.
Then get ready, because your life will continue to change in favorable ways. And now here's the thing.
My energy was being drained today in a situation. I was getting my nails done, and these two girls were having this very intense conversation. And I was like, you can meditate with your eyes open, Maria. And I looked outside and I just started doing it. I'm like, my new life, yes, my other life, the things I want. I started thinking of all those things, and I came back fully energized.
Yeah, it takes a lot of energy to feel anger and agitation. In fact,
because that was one of the other. So sorry, that was the other big breakthrough. So I was doing the progressive in anticipation of the event, and I had another breakthrough. And my breakthrough was, so this is my energy for the day. And I was like, how am I using it? Anger, stress, fear, worry, annoyance. And then go back to all of it. And then I'm totally drained by 2:00. I need multiple coffees, and I'm unhappy, and I'm just on that kind of hamster wheel. So once that hit me, I go, oh my God, I can change this. The worry and the fear, none of it has served me really. I mean, in certain circumstances, okay. But for the most part, my husband and I still have the same situations. I chose to worry and fear and live in scarcity. He didn't. Guess who has more issues to deal with? Me. And we have the same thing. So I every day, this is what I think about. I think about my cup and how am I going to use it? Nice. I'm going to use it to create. I'm going to use it to be light. I'm going to use it to feel light. I'm going to create my life. And the things that happen, just like you said in your event, where people would manifest, something stupid like $1 million that week or whatever. I've already had those moments where I've asked for real stupid big things in my new life, and they're coming to me in ways that I would have never expected.
That's the unknown. If you can expect it, it's nothing new because you could predict it. That's the known. It has to come in a way that you can expect. It has to come in a way that you can't anticipate. It has to surprise you. It has to leave no doubt that what you're doing inside of you is producing that outcome outside of you. And when that outcome occurs, you pay attention to what you did and you do it with more intention, with more joy, more belief. And wow, then things start really changing in your life. And it has to come in that way that you can't predict. That's the fun part. The brain learns by mistakes and surprises. It's time for a few surprises. Most people live their life in a habit. They think the same thoughts, they perform the same actions, they live by the same emotions, but they secretly expect their life to change. But how you think, how you act, and how you feel is called your personality. And your personality creates your personal reality. That's it. So if you think 60 to 70,000 thoughts in one day, and 90% of those thoughts are the same thoughts as the day before, the same thoughts always lead to the same choices. The same choices always lead to the same behaviors. The same behaviors create the same experiences, and the same experiences produce the same emotions. And those same emotions then drive your very same thoughts. And so you get caught in this kind of biological, neurological, and quantum fixated pattern. So then the hardest part about change, really, in creating the life that you want, being defined by a vision of the future instead of a memory of the past, is not making the same choices you did the day before. And the moment you do that, you step into the unknown. Now, you and I have been conditioned and hypnotized into believing that the unknown is some scary place. But when you begin to realize the unknown is the perfect place to create from, that void of unpredictability, that uncertainty, that unfamiliarity, is really the quantum place of uncertainty where all manifestations come from. So when you and I become comfortable living in that unknown place, I think then that we begin to manifest the things we want in our lives. So for me personally, I want to execute and be defined by a vision of the future instead of the memories of the past. So most people's brains are organized to reflect everything they know in their life. Their brain is a record of the past. And if you feel the same way every single day, and feelings and emotions are the end product of past experiences, it means, number one, nothing new is happening in your life. And number two, those emotions are keeping you anchored to the past. If thoughts are the language of the brain, and feelings are the language of the body, and how you think and how you feel creates a state of being, most people are literally, biologically, neurologically, chemically, genetically, and even quantum-wise connected to a past. So then the question is, the fundamental question is, can you believe in a future that you can't see or experience with your senses yet, but you've thought about enough times in your mind that your brain is literally changed to look like the experience has already occurred? Now, the latest research in neuroscience and neuroplasticity tells us we can change our brain to look like the event has already occurred. And can we begin to emotionally embrace a future reality that's a potential in the quantum field and begin to emotionally embrace it to such a degree that we fall in love with that future reality, that our body as our unconscious mind begins to believe it's living in that future reality in the present moment, and we're signaling new genes and new ways to change our body to look like the experience has already occurred in preparation for the event. Now, think about this.
So making our inner world more real than the outer world.
Right, but not only that, you have to then understand that when you truly do this properly, You're not waiting for your healing to feel whole. You're not waiting for your success to feel empowered. You're not waiting for your wealth to feel abundant. You're not waiting for your new relationship to feel love. You're not waiting for the mystical moment to feel awe. That's the old model of reality, of cause and effect, waiting for something outside of you to change how you feel inside of you. And when you feel better inside, you pay attention to whoever would ever cause that. That's cause and effect. And when you begin to make the correlation between what changed you from outside and inside, you create an associative memory. The quantum model of reality begins to say then you have to teach your body emotionally how that future is going to feel like before it's made manifest. In other words, you have to feel awe in order for the mystical moment to happen. You have to feel abundance before your wealth can occur. You have to feel in love with life before your new relationship happens. And so we're not defining reality by our senses because we're not waiting then for anything outside of us to change how we feel inside of us. So if there's physical evidence in your brain and body to look like the experience has already occurred, physical evidence, because the epigenetic model of reality says you can change your body by thought alone, and neuroplasticity says you can change your brain by thought alone. So if there's physical evidence to look like the experience has already occurred, well, relax, because the experience is going to find you. And it's going to come in a way that you least expect.
Yeah.
Because
it takes time at first. You know, later on in the second part, we'll speak about how you healed your own body at a young age, and then how now you're teaching it in your workshops. But before, and you get that click. I read like after 6 weeks. But when does that click happen? At first, like it's very, it's not as yeah.
The challenge is then to every day be defined by a vision of the future. So then, when you combine a clear intention, that's a thoughtful process, with an elevated emotion, a heartfelt state of being, thoughts are the language of the brain, feelings are the language of the body. When you truly do that, your brain and body are living in the future instead of living in the past. And you're going to be drawn to some new event, because thoughts are the electrical charge in the quantum field, and feelings are the magnetic charge. And how you think and how you feel broadcasts an electromagnetic signature that influences every single atom in your life. So here's the question then. The fundamental question is, it's going to take time to pull your brain and body out of the past and continuously invest your energy into the future. So can you then maintain that vision, that view of your future, independent of the conditions in your environment, independent of the emotional addictions or conditionings or habits of the body, and independent of time? Because if you can, that's what greatness is all about. That's when we begin to truly change. And people around the world are doing this consistently, and they're doing it really well because it's our natural, innate way of being. We are creators.
Yeah.
You do a lot of repetition, which I thank you for, and I really get this now, that the power of repetition is so important for us to rewire our brain, right?
Yeah. Well, look, I mean, repetition actually allows nerve cells to fire and wire together. If learning is making new synaptic connections, then remembering is maintaining and sustaining those connections. And some of the research shows that if you just take people and you have them concentrate on one topic for about an hour, study, that at the end of that hour, they'll double the number of connections in their brain just from their interaction with that information. But if they don't review it, if they don't repeat it, if they don't think about it, those circuits prune apart within hours or days. So if learning is making new synaptic connections, then remembering is maintaining and sustaining those connections. And for me, I just know that when I'm in an audience, I want to make learning fun. I want to make it fresh. I want to mix science with examples. I want to come at it as many ways as I can. But when people start to understand the concept, I think it's so important for them then to turn to the person next to them and explain it. Because if they can't explain that model of understanding, then it's not wired in their brain. But if they can explain it, they're beginning to install the neurological hardware in their brain in preparation for an experience. So then when they have the experience, when they apply that philosophy, that theory, that knowledge, and they get their behaviors to match their intentions, experience enriches those philosophical, theoretical circuits in the brain. And then all of a sudden, the experience causes the brain to make a chemical, and that's called a feeling or an emotion. Now we're teaching our body chemically to understand what our mind is intellectually understood. So knowledge is for the mind and experience is for the body. And in that moment, the person's beginning to embody the truth of that philosophy. And so repetition then allows them to understand what they're doing and why. And if you understand the what and the why, the how gets easier because you can assign meaning to what you're doing. And when you assign meaning to what you're doing, you have more intention behind what you're doing. So I like to do it so that nothing is left to conjecture, nothing is left to dogma, nothing is left to superstition. You understand what you're doing and why, and I think science is the language to do that.
I think when our perception about the past changes, our perception about the future changes as well.
Because most beliefs are created from past experiences, right? So children, when they're in their early ages, their brainwaves are very slow. Like their brainwaves are in alpha when they're like 7 to 12. They're in theta when they're like 2 to 6 years old, and they're in delta like when they're newborn to 2 years old. And so these brainwave states are states that were really suggestible to information.
So when we hear information, we believe it.
And we accept it, we believe it, we surrender to it as if it's the truth without analyzing it, because there's no analytical facilities yet.
Right.
The analytical mind starts around 12 or so, 7 to 12, and that analytical mind is actually what creates a barrier between the conscious mind and the subconscious mind.
So before 12, roughly, what we see, how we model our parents' behavior, what they say to us.
It's all being programmed subconsciously, right? And so that's really, really important, because if you heard money is the root of all evil, money is bad, only certain people are allowed to make money, you have to work hard to make money, this is how you got to do it, and that becomes the foundation subconsciously. Like let's recording an audio file. You just keep recording that audio file, it becomes a subconscious program, right? So a lot of people have a relationship with money based on either what they've been told or what they've experienced in their outer environment, right? So then we gain information from our environment, and the stronger the emotion we feel from experiences in our lives, the more altered we feel inside of us, the more the brain freezes a frame and takes a picture. And that snapshot is called the memory. So
based on an emotion.
Based on an emotion. The emotion alters our internal state. So you're going along as Lewis, feeling really good, and all of a sudden you have this trauma, you have this crisis, you have this shock, and all of a sudden you have this dramatic change in your internal state, and your senses get heightened, and then you freeze the frame and you associate this internal state with whatever it is that's causing it, right? And that's how we create long-term memories, right? So
Are painful memories more powerful, or beautiful memories more powerful?
they're both equal.
Okay.
They're both equal, but the problem is I think most people experience from more the negative emotions, right? And those negative emotions really are derived from the hormones of stress, right? So the alarm system, the emergency system, creates an arousal inwardly. And that arousal is saying there's something dangerous in your outer environment, right? And it could be a person, a circumstance, an accident, or whatever. And that change in emotional state causes you to remember the event. You got to pay attention, right? You got to stay really and narrow your focus on the cause. So think about people who have relationships with money, right, from the past. All beliefs are based on past experiences. So you have an experience where you lose money, you have an experience where money's taken away from you, you have an experience where you don't have enough, you're living in a place where there's not enough money, or a family that's not enough money. Then the emotion that most people are living by on a moment-to-moment basis is lack. Like, I'm in lack of having something that I want. Okay? Now, there's nothing wrong with that, because the experience changes your emotional state. You freeze the frame, you take a picture. The problem is, that's hardware. So we think neurologically within the circuits of that past experience, and we feel chemically within the boundaries of that emotion, which would say, for example, be lack, right? So now the person says...
before you go on to the next thing, what happens to the body and the mind when it is in an environment of lack? Mentally or physically, I'm in lack. What is the body and the mind saying?
Yeah, so the body is saying, I'm waiting for some external event to occur. I win the lottery, I marry the right guy, whatever it is, that you're waiting for that event to occur, that experience produces an emotion. So the emotion then takes away the lack. And so when we play the game in three-dimensional reality, the creation game in three-dimensional reality, we experience separation from everyone or everything because our senses fool us into the illusion, the hallucination of separation. I'm here and you're there. I'm here and the door is over there. So I'm aware that I'm here at one point of consciousness and the door is over there, another point of consciousness. Okay, so in order for me to get from here to the door, I got to move my body and do something through space. I got to do something, and everything in this three-dimensional reality is going to take time and energy, right? So, okay, so then here's Lewis right here, and then he says, okay, I want this experience in my future, and your brain automatically predicts and projects how far in the future you think it's going to take.
Maybe it's a year, 5 years, 10 years.
30 years.
Oh my gosh.
Right? Because that's what it's going to take to pay off that house, right? So now, one point of consciousness, I'm here. The other point of consciousness is where I'm placing my dream. So I'm separate from that experience. So then how do I get to that experience? In three-dimensional reality, you got to get up and you got to do something. You got to go to work. You got to drive to work. It takes energy. You got to fill your car with gas. You got to eat food. You got to work. You know, all this stuff. You got to sleep. You got to recover if there's stress. And now people are, in a sense, waiting for the experience that's 10 years down the road or 30 years down the road to happen, to take away the lack of them not having it. And unfortunately, many times when the experience finally occurs, they can't enjoy it because they're too exhausted, right? So you play the game, you go to school, you study really hard, or you study on your own, you develop some skills, you make the right choices, you start saving money, you start learning from your mistakes, and then the game is how many things can you accumulate, and that accumulation then you associate with being wealthy or being abundant or being successful, right? And some people get really good at it, right? You can get really good at that. But for the most part, though, when we create from three-dimensional reality, we're creating from lack and separation. In other words, you're driving down the road and you see someone driving a car that all of a sudden you realize that you don't have. The moment you become aware that that person has that car and you don't have it, you're in lack of having it, right? So what the brain naturally does is it naturally creates you driving that car. And you have an image of yourself driving that car and you start identifying, wow, that would be a greater experience for me to have. The problem is the distance between the thought of what you want and the experience of actually happening for most people is the concept called time, right? Between cause and effect, right? So some people develop the ability to manage themselves and manage their life. They develop certain skills and they can pay for it and they can get it very quickly. The problem is when the novelty of that experience wears off, you know, the car, and they're no longer identifying with that, and the feeling of emptiness and lack comes back.
They need to find something else.
They got to go and find something else. And so there's this game that goes on where you never have enough, right? And that's the lack game, right? So then if you think about people having the things they want in their life, when they create from lack and separation, it's the experience in three-dimensional reality that produces the emotion, and the emotion is saying, let's feel and experience this thing that you've been in lack and separation from, and that emotion then takes away the lack or separation. But you've worked really hard to get it, okay? Nothing wrong with that. Is there another way to do it?
Yes.
Okay, so the person who's living in lack is waiting for their wealth to feel abundant. They're waiting for their success to feel empowered. They're waiting for their healing to feel gratitude. They're waiting for their new relationship to feel love. They're waiting for their mystical experience to feel awe. That's the Newtonian model of reality, of cause and effect. You know, waiting for that event to happen to take away this separation or lack. Nothing wrong with it. It's the way most people create. But what we've discovered is actually something else. The moment you feel gratitude, your healing begins. The moment you feel worthy and abundant, you're generating wealth. The moment you're empowered, you are moving towards your success. The moment you're in love with yourself and you're in love with life, you'll create an equal. The moment you are in awe of life, you're going to have a mystical experience. And so that's causing an effect, right? So then if you can teach people then how to create, instead of from lack or separation, but create from wholeness, and create from what we call the quantum field instead of three-dimensional reality.
What's the difference?
Okay, so the way first of all, it takes knowledge, okay? The quantum field is an invisible field of energy that exists beyond our senses. You can't see it, you can't smell it, you can't taste it, you can't hear it, you can't feel it. It exists beyond our experience of three-dimensional reality.
Would this be in our mind's consciousness, or would this be in a different space?
Okay, let's look at that. So the answer to the question is, how much of your waking day do you put your attention on matter, on the material world, and how much of your waking day are you aware of energy and frequency? For most people, they're unaware of the quantum field, and if you're unaware of it, it doesn't exist for you. Right. Just like you have a nose, but if you're unaware of it, it doesn't exist for you. The moment you become aware of it, it exists. Well, the quantum field, you can study all kinds of science, and they'll tell you there is this invisible field of frequency and energy that exists beyond the senses that tend to connect everything physical and material. In fact, everything physical and material is connected to this field, okay? So how do you get there, right? How do you get there?
How do you get there?
How do you get there? So we discovered that when you take all of your attention off your body and you are not paying attention to your emotions, your drives, your habits, if you could take all of your attention off of every element in your environment, your cell phone, your tablet, your computer, your car, your whatever it is, your bed, take your attention away from everything, every place that you live, where you sleep, or you work, and you're not thinking about time. You're not thinking about your schedule, where you need to be, or what happened yesterday. You can relax into the present moment. There tends to be a dramatic change in the way the brain functions when people do this properly. We call it getting beyond yourself, but in a sense, you're dissociating from your three-dimensional reality. Why? Because if you're thinking about anything in your three-dimensional reality, that's where your attention is and that's where your energy is, okay? So we kind of figured out this formula when people really become nobody, no one, no thing, nowhere, and no time. They're pretty much all of a sudden outside the constraints of the Newtonian world of got to do something to get an outcome. And if you can teach people how to linger there without a name, without a face, without a profession, without a family, without a culture, without a past, without a disease, you teach them how to be in this place we call the unknown, right? And you teach them that from that place, that invisible field, is where everything material comes from. And if they could create coherence in their brain, you need a strong signal in the brain. The more coherent the brain, the more stronger the signal.
What do you mean a strong signal?
Okay, let's see how I could say this. When most people, when we look at brains in real time, and we're looking at people's how their mind is working. When you're under stress, okay, stress is created by not being able to predict something that's going to happen in your life. The perception that something's going to get worse or you can't control something, right? So when that occurs, we switch on that primitive nervous system called the fight or flight nervous system, and the brain goes into this very alarmed state called high beta. That means pay attention to the outer world. There's danger out there. But if it's not a predator and it's traffic or your coworker or your ex,
right.
This is where it gets to be a problem because it becomes very maladaptive, right? So when we're in that state and the brain is in that aroused state, we try to control and predict everything. So every person, every object, everything, every place, even your body has a neurological network in your brain, right? So as the arousal happens, we start shifting our attention to all these elements, and like a lightning storm in the clouds, the brain starts firing very, very incoherently. And when the brain's incoherent, we're incoherent.
That's not a strong signal.
It's a static on the wire. That's disconnection. There is no signal.
Right.
So when we're in that state, we're always really looking for the worst case scenario of what's going to happen, because if you prepare for the worst, anything less happens, a better chance of survival, right? So in this kind of aroused state, as we shift our attention to each one of these elements that are known in our environment, the brain starts compartmentalizing and firing out of order. And that is what creates what's called autonomic dysregulation. That causes the brain and body to get really out of balance, right? So in that state, we're over-focused. You know, when you're stressed, you're over-focused on something. You can't stop thinking about it. Our research shows that when you do that, you actually make your brain worse because you're analyzing your problems within some disturbing emotion, and that emotion is driving you further out of balance. You're actually knocking your brain and body out of balance by thought alone, and you're driving it into these more aroused states.